Welcome to this sunny afternoon in my garden in Mildura, and welcome to a further reading of the Tertiary World. Today I read you the last account of the seventh memory that arose as I walked down Canning Street in 2008, and then I'll move on to the 6th North-South Street, Nicholson Street. This is an account of what happened when I walked to 361 Canning Street in 2008. This is what I recalled. We lived in this house through 1974 with Lynn and Joe and all the children. The kitchen had a tiny fireplace located at waist level. You could stand near it and stretch your hands and then turn to warm your back. Someone, I can't remember who, had given me a ticket to the Melbourne Film Festival that year, and I had gone down to the Palais to see Tarkovsky's Andrei Rublev. I sat through it, fascinated by every single aspect of the film, the grand sweep of scenery, the ambitiousness of the screenplay, the faultless direction, the miraculous acting, and by mostly what I thought Tarkovsky had left out. I couldn't name what that might be, but I knew it was what had moved me most of all. I was especially captivated by the episode of the bell, but the moment the bell began to sound in the film, I suddenly came to. I knew then that my daughter was being born. I scrambled out of my seat and called home from a phone box outside the theatre. "Susie's gone to the hospital, hurry," yelled Lynn down the phone, and I was off to the Jessie McPherson Hospital like a shot. I got there just in time to see my second daughter being born a few days ahead of schedule. Some years ago I saw the entire film for the first time, and so I was able to hear the end of the bells sounding. I then remembered how inhospitable the house had felt when we returned to it after the birth, how cold the blue room we slept in had been, how merciless that 1974 winter turned out to be. It then felt like Sonny's birth had lasted from the moment the bell began to sound in the Palais Theatre on the 19th of June 1974 until its ringing ended when I finally saw the entire film for the first time. One day I told Sonny this and she said, "That's funny. I've tried to see the end of that movie 3 times, and every time we get to the bell episode, something happens, and I either have to leave or someone visits or I fall asleep." Then we talked about the house at number 361, the fireplace, the balcony. She doesn't remember it at all, of course, but she insists that she remembers a wonderful little fireplace appearing at a certain point in the film, probably in the monastery where Andrei Rublev lives for many years. It was built at waist level, she says, and it was good for warming one's hands and back. All the monks seem to do that. I don't remember seeing that fireplace in the film at all. And since she's told me this, I've watched Andrei Rublev twice more. Each time I have completely forgotten to watch out for the monk's fireplace. The 6th North-South Street, Nicholson Street. (751) Nicholson Street. Frank Montagano's pharmacy is still here, though Frank himself is living somewhere on the Gold Coast now. Frank is a pharmacist. He owned the shop and surgery next door where Dr. Bisogni practiced. My mother and my sister worked in this pharmacy as sales assistants through most of the 1960s. I also worked in this building upstairs in a small architectural office run by Roberto Kodnich. He was the first architect I ever met. He had been trained in Trieste, and my mother had excitedly told him that on leaving school I planned to study architecture. In gracious response, he offered to train me. He drove a white Carmen Ghia and swore endlessly at the builder who undertook most of his jobs in Triestine dialect. His idea of training me was asking me to complete complex drafting jobs and working drawings without any instruction whatsoever. It was as though he was totally oblivious to the fact that I'd had no drafting experience at all. Most days after school, I would sit at a drawing table attempting this near impossible task while I listened to him abusing the hell out of his builder, who seemed to be constantly pleading for his life. It wasn't a good introduction to the profession, and the neo-Wrightian 1920s lettering I adopted from Roberto didn't stand me in very good stead when I eventually enrolled in first-year architecture. It seemed to rain a lot every time I was at work in this office. My impression of an architect's life was consequently formed by this experience, and the architect's challenge seemed to consist entirely of designing alterations to run-down supermarkets in suburbs like Lilydale, while watching rain hit the window panes when one occasionally looked up from the drawing board, all the while listening to Roberto abuse builders, clients, and the world in general. This seemed a universe away from the serene, creatively collaborative pursuit I imagined the profession entailed. I'll read that again. This seemed a universe away from the serene, creatively collaborative pursuit I had imagined the profession entailed. Roberto eventually had to close the business down, and thankfully I stopped working in his office, but each time I'm anywhere near this building, I can still hear Roberto's threats, his shrill voice rising above the builder's pleads for understanding and patience. I can see Frank Mantagano standing behind the shop counter, beckoning me silently into the chemist's inner sanctum by raising his thick eyebrows repeatedly above the frames of his spectacles. He's holding a pair of brown Italian leather shoes with rippled soles. I notice they have beautifully stitched panels. I don't need them anymore, he tells me in a matter-of-fact tone. Do you want them? I thank him in a confused mumble, and in the back of the shop, amongst cardboard boxes and endless rows of bottles, I put them on immediately. How pleasurable it is to walk in these shoes. I wear them every single day of my life until many years later, as I am walking through the deserted, windswept spring greenness of Royal Park. The left shoe comes apart in the boggy wetness of oval number 3, like a dark brown 4-petaled flower. The first story of Nicholson Street. I remember that shoe very clearly coming apart as I got bogged in mud one spring morning, walking to University High School to take my Italian language class. I'm trusting this is of even mild interest to you. The second memory tomorrow, somewhere in my house or garden. I wish you a very, very lovely afternoon.